Hello, everyone. This is the gang from the National Law Institute. Francis, Martin, Moritz, and Curt. We're doing our office hours. Today is Friday, October 24th. What year is it? 2025. We have got an enormous backlog of questions. I hope we can do justice to. How this usually works is that Francis reads the questions. Martin usually has gone in and answered them. And then I respond or something. But we've got the luxury of Moritz here. So I'm going to hopefully Moritz will have some responses to them. Usually I don't, why is it that we have this thing where the first one consumes a lot of time? What is that?
I don't know. I think it's just the pattern.
I don't know. All right.
So I think maybe you just grow tired as we go further.
Is that what it is? Yeah. That could be it. What the fuck is this? Can you hear that dog? Is that coming across? No, the dog bark?
Not really.
That does. It's fine. All right. So how many? We usually get through what, 5, 4?
5 or 6 is the average. If we do well, like 7 or 8.
It's going to take us forever to get.
Well, I was going to say, yes, it may take us forever, but we will get to your questions. We just need to keep going.
Thank God.
Consistency.
Well, we haven't had consistency for a while.
Well, I mean, you could say even once every 4 weeks is consistency. I would like to get it down to once every 2 weeks. All right. Question 1. Question 1. Christians are by default civic nationalists in their faith. Fiat religion inflatable into worthlessness because it's faith-based, whereas the Jews and pagans were right in that religion comes from the womb and penis, respectively. The first principles of Christianity is the incorporation of other non-kin through cult indoctrination by testimony of faith and an unwarrantable promise of immortality after death. In this context, as the demographics of the church, i.e. Catholicism, changes and Europeans are downgraded, what does this mean for Europeans when they are no longer the load-bearing demographics? Will the church abandon them in a grandiose exposition of institutional hypergamy? Curt, I remember you, didn't you post something on X about this?
How recently? I don't remember. I usually play with this topic because it needs to be addressed. You can't write it needs 500 pages to address this question, right? You can't do it. So what I try to do is address a piece at a time from different perspectives. I have been traditionally quite hostile to the Abrahamic religions, but they solve certain problems. So I think there's the first part of this chapter, the first part of this question that makes an assertion about Christian universalism. It's just true. And then the problem of what happens as we become as the church loses influence, and secondly, as Europeans lose numbers in relation to the rest of the world. So I don't know. I think Martin's actually answered this pretty well. So Martin, if you could kick it off.
Yeah, I'm not sure we can speak of abandonment. It says to me the church only ever served Europeans insofar they served it, and it's among the chief reasons why German emperors never managed to unite Europe, which would have left it in a much better position in the modern world. The church was always protective of the Jews and always universalistic. This is not to say I don't find value in anything the Catholic Church has ever done. Particularly, its social teachings offer a much preferable alternative to either capitalism or state socialism. But today, it has simply adjusted to the modern zeitgeist. If the situation changes for the better, it will adjust again.
Great. Do you have anything, Maurice? You don't want me to go?
I'll let you go first. I'm still organizing.
Yeah.
Okay, so
I'll have something to say after that as well.
do you want to go first? Because
No, you go.
All right. So this is the simple way to look at it is we tend to look at the Middle East as the older civilization, which is true, but we forget that the Abrahamic religions are a counter-revolution against Europeans in particular, but Europeans and Persians together specifically. The Middle East was never able to unify in any sensible terms. It's always been profoundly tribal. During the time of Christ, there's no basically the Israel was a slum. It was a very poor part of the world. So what they were looking for was what they did was they looked at Greek and Roman law, Greek mostly, Greek philosophy and Roman law, and they were trying, and that which was held together by not only the precursor to the Bible, which was the epic sequence of the Greeks, which the remnants of which we don't have much. We think of it as like Troy and that kind of stuff. But we had a corpus of historical religion in the European tradition, built from the Greek context. And the Library of Alexandria, which shouldn't surprise us, was largely consisted of commentaries on those stories, the epic cycle. And so what we see is of later years, we hear a lot when Christianity takes over, we see a great expansion of commentaries on that Christian religion. But the original religion of the West was the epic, was basically the the rise and fall of the Bronze Age, right? And its recovery and the mythology that was remembered prior to it and persisted and was recreated afterward. So the epic cycle, which is really is really the Bible that was the foundation of the West. The second thing is that religion that we did have, which is, in other words, that's a literary tradition, right? That's a historical religion. The religion we did have did not see the world as good and evil. It saw it as order and chaos. When you make good and evil, it's like it's a question of it can ever be defeated. But in the West, the chaos can be defeated. Men can ascend into godhood, the demigods, and then gods. So the gods are not perfect or full of wise or all-knowing or all-powerful. They have various powers, but they're basically like a dysfunctional family, like the rest of the world is. And so, so there's not this concept of evil like we think of it. There's just things that inhibit order and things that bring it about. So the third piece is that the Indo-Europeans on the steppe had no other way to form a society out of entrepreneurial warriors than contractualism, which led to law. So these pieces are in place: the law, the literature, and the religion. And so what happens in the Middle East is between the Persians and the Europeans are basically the superior forces that are conquering this area, and because they're not able to organize into a religion, and into a political system, because they're terribly tribal. And so what the Jews did with Christianity and the Muslims later with Islam, it's actually Christianity first, rabbinical Judaism second, and Islam third. what they did with what the Jews did originally is because they were in the money business, and because with the introduction of coin, the Greek introduction of coin, we had broken traditional bonds. They were looking up. In other words, I gotta do something about the dog.
Just so you know, we can't really hear it.
No.
Io, put it up. No. Here you go. I have a big furry wet dog in the house to shut him up. All right. So what the Jews did is they went back and they saw, because they were becoming literate, educated, and they had an understanding of money because the Greek introduction of it. They said, how can we maintain our identity, our prosper? How can we compete, basically? And so you got Christianity first, and as an offshoot that was not specific to Judaism, and then you had the fundamentalist side, which was rabbinical Judaism. So you had this split, which was let's get bigger, and this split, the other split that said let's get smaller. So rabbinical Judaism is a counter-revolution against not only Christianity, but it's a counter-revolution against the Indo-European competition between the superiority of the Mediterraneans and the Persians. So, and so if you think about it in that vein, you sort of get the world, see the world through as this problem that everybody's trying to solve, because precisely because Greeks and then the Romans restored trade after the fall of the after the Bronze Age collapse, right? So we get the restoration of trade, we get people trading stuff, whatever. So polities get bigger, economies get bigger, conflict, people are interacting more, conflicts get bigger, etc. So and so the issue of Christianity is that it did function as the poor, how do I say this, in both Persia and Europe were aristocratic top-down civilizations run by a conquering elite that domesticated the population, and most of whom were slaves. The Middle East had a different structure. They had slaves, of course, but it was a different structure. And so, but they'd not been able to organize this political clarity. And so, and there was a vast underclass that was fragmented. So what Christianity solved was a way for people to have a virtue if they were not strong and powerful, wise, or wealthy, as were the Persians or the Europeans. So they made a virtuous religion of the poor. Well, what happens once you have a virtuous religion of the poor? It becomes they form a body politic, and there is a status to be obtained by leadership through it. Trying to figure out what you're smiling at, Brey. I suppose it's not what I'm talking about.
Something entirely different.
Yes, and so you get this value of Christianity as solving the problem of aristocracy. You actually get this problem of if people are either basically domesticated animals or slaves, right? Or they're aristocracy. Well, once you have Christianity, all of a sudden you have a political system of the poor. So think of it as a house of government, right? That actually advocates for its side. On that sense, that it solved a pretty good problem, and that's why it spread so widely. It wasn't until the Persians and the Romans exhausted each other in warfare that the Islamists who could not practice Christianity effectively, because the Christians had tried to make a Christian religion at the I want to say Lycia Council of Lycia. What is it? Whatever. They tried to make it into a law, and so the Byzantines were trying to make it into a law. This made it impossible for the Muslims, and so the Muslims revolted with their version of a peasant religion, Islam, which was basically a rebellion against the um, their chieftains who were corrupt as fuck. I mean, it's just, excuse me, I didn't mean to swear, corrupt as heck. And so they had conducted the rebellion against their elites the way that the Christianity had conducted a rebellion against the Greek and Persian elites. And so while the Middle East was largely Christian, it was essentially forcibly converted to Islam by two means, either by conquest or by the fact that if you were a dhimmi, you were Muslim, you had to pay a 30% tax. And so most people didn't convert to Islam out of devotion. They converted to it in order to avoid the 30% increase in taxes. So anyway, so Curt, where are you going with all of this? I'm trying to set the foundation for understanding why these things work the way they do. But so yes, there is a problem, a virtue of Christianity, like there's a virtue of empire. In other words, empires take a bunch of disparate tribes and they slowly produce uniform standards of weights and measures in the most abstract sense, like ethics and stuff, right? But then once the empire is established and people are trading and getting along, they tend to separate. In other words, there's a desire to separate from empire, and this is a cycle, right? So people get sufficiently divergent, and hopefully they join federations. If they can't join federations, they devolve to empire. Well, the same thing happens with religions, right? Because a religion is basically a house of government for the poor. So so just as you had this concentration, you have this concentration of Christian religion that helps to create a uniform standard of weights and measures and behavior on the population, and it gives this underclass, the poor, a set of sort of governmental position, and they can have virtue instead of thinking they're, animals. Basically, they can have virtue as the wealth increases in society. And in the end, the same thing happens. At some point, you get fragmentation, just like you go from fragmentation of empires, you get fragmentation of religions. So, and so what we're seeing here now is the total end of the religious cycle, right? As religion is being replaced largely by a reformation called ideology. And so Christianity's universalism made it adaptive during the expansion, but once its contraction, it became parasitic. And so what this guy is asking is yeah, it's become parasitic. You call it civic nationalists. That's a good framing for it. But what it means is they're not kinship oriented. And moreover, when Europe was Christianized, one of the primary effects of the church was to steal the land from the aristocracy. So how did they do that? They prevented cousin marriage. And so by preventing cousin marriage, they basically broke up the landholdings so that the church could acquire them. So unfortunately, what happened to the church was this is how the church was captured by the aristocracy, is that the way you got around this problem was that you put your young sons into the church, and then you donated the land to the local church. Except that you were the people that bought the church, you funded the church, you made the church, all the people in the church work your lands, and you're basically putting your children inside of your youngest children inside of your oldest, depending on what it is, inside your land holdings through the church. So the church became the corporation that managed the agrarian era on behalf of the aristocracy, and then it had enough external power of to grant you legitimacy or not, that if they took away your legitimacy, that means that all the other nobles around you want to steal your shit, had permission to. So the church did end up being a sort of authority, and a sort of judiciary and authority that constrained the nobility, but the nobility had, for all intents and purposes, captured the church, and then we get the level of corruption that, of course, you see out of all bureaucracies, which came out of that. So, what is this guy's question really? In this context, as the demographics of the church change, of Catholicism changes, and Europeans are downgraded relative to others, what does this mean? It means that what is happening, which is the restoration of nationalism. We've already had a nationalism revolution before in response, especially around Napoleon, and now we're having another nationalism. It's actually just the attempt of which is, I'm sure Martin's frustrated by, the attempt of the Americans, the British, to maintain imperial trade, and the Americans to maintain the rebellion against communism and trade, by bringing in trade, that's kept this going for this long. But I mean, right now we're doing exactly what Huntington said would happen. In fact, Fukuyama is a student of Huntington. Huntington was the sort of theorist of this. He said we'd revert to the conflict of civilizations, which we are, and we'd revert, and within the conflict of civilizations, we would revert to traditional world order, which is basically tribalism, because humans are tribal.
I see a lot of the previous push for nationalism as a baiting with a false promise that small nations that can never be sovereign could be sovereign.
That's what federations are for.
Yeah, but that's not what happened.
Isn't that what's happening? It looks like what's happening. I mean, Europe's a federation. America's a federation. The Five Eyes are a federation. I mean, we all have all these federations.
None of these are pro-European federations.
You don't think Oh, I see. You think the EU isn't pro-European? Is that what you're saying?
No, it's not.
Yeah. Yeah, because it bought the economic bullshit that you're always.
I think this is again one of those things where just because it isn't what we want it to be, that doesn't mean that the project, when it was pursued, had that as its aim. And I think the ever presence of warfare against the good things or by enemies against those things doesn't invalidate the attempt to create something. So I think this is something that I've been wrestling with as well, like that, to recognize that if you want to keep good things, you actually have to actively defend them.
Some of the people that originally argued for European Union did so that Europe could be a real competitor to America.
That's right.
Not a slave to America.
Yes, but France wants to rule Europe. That's the problem. That's the fundamental problem facing Europe. Is France has the will to rule, and it's other than the Russians, it's the worst people to have rule. The people that need to rule are the Germans. And you need a core state for a federation. The core state needs to be the Germans, and until we can get them out of their guilty slumber, that's not going to happen.
But that's what the English or the British don't want that.
Yeah, that's who said it about NATO, that the point is to keep America in, Russians out, and Germans down.
Probably, yes.
At least for now.
I don't think
geopolitical situations change. That's not always.
These Germans, they won't fuck each other enough to have enough kids. I mean, what's the problem? What happened? What's going on there?
Our will to power has been suppressed for a long time.
Yes, I guess so.
Liberalism is basically castration.
Yeah. All right. So, do we answer this question?
I think we did, but during your answer to this question, it made me realize something. I'm not sure if that's correct. So, we talked about the order civilizations develop institution. And both European and Far East civilization developed, or I guess underdeveloped religion last. But while you're answering that question, I realize, is it because both European and Far East civilizations had stronger institutions, such as a state or a law, such that they don't really need religion to get people to cooperate?
Correct.
And therefore they develop religion last. But because we develop religions last, our civilizations are naturally more prone to hostile religions. It's like if your body has defensive mechanisms because you're more ingrained. Like if, for example, in China, right? China is very sensitive of a hostile state, hostile state-based. How should I put it? Hostile law and hostile state that are contrary to the Chinese civilization's state and laws, but less so on the religion side, not really been realizing that communism itself is religion.
Well, I think there's some clarification needed because everyone's first institution was religion, but it was not the sort of coercive organizing institution that Abrahamism is.
Wait a minute. No, I don't think that's right. Say that again.
But everyone's first institution was religion, some sort of ritualistic.
I understand. I see. It's organized religion.
Yes,
right.
I mean, mostly talk about Abrahamism.
No, I think that's what I mean. Yeah, I mean,
but religion means many different things, and in many ways, Abrahamism is like anti-religion.
No, we separate religion from organized religion. Essentially, Abrahamism is a political religion.
Yes.
Right. So we generally separate. The hard one is India, but we usually separate basically authoritarian religions, or what we call political religions, or etc., from natural religion, right? So anything that technically speaking, there's the religion, if you want to call it that is common in the world is natural religion, which is basically mythology. And then we get formal religion. We get a mixed formal religion in India, and we get a formal religion in the Middle East. And for reasons I think we understand, Hinduism bifurcates into Buddhism, which cannot compete locally.
I don't even know if you could call the various Indian religions organized religion in the sense that we think of it. I think it's more somewhere in between, like between spiritual worship, i.e. like Shintoism, right? Shintoism is more of
but Shintoism is a harmonious cross, and what they did formally take the Hindu religion and make it caste-based. In other words, there is a political aspect to it. There's just no authoritarian aspect to it, right? There's no whatever. Buddhism is the same. There's some formalism to it because of Buddha, right? But it's basically an innovative religion that is not necessarily political. It's actually social. It's how do I live within this social domain?
Yeah, it tried to be political at some point, and then the Chinese state definitely suppressed it.
Yes, which thank you very much. There's a lot of things that old China did right, and I'm not really fond of new China.
Well, like I said, the new China is it's a civilization state taken over by hostile religion.
Yeah.
Well, it's also the last power that isn't trying to exterminate its own population. So that's something.
Say that again.
It's the last major power that isn't trying to exterminate its own population.
Oh. All right, question 2.
We really went for a while on that one, didn't we?
Yes, it's an established pattern. Question 2 from Logpo. Question about ternary logic. Apologies if this is a bit long. So far, this is how I understand ternary logic. The plus and minuses are opposite charges and strategies. They can oscillate into a state of more complex negative entropy, denoted as equals. States of negative entropy equals, which can also be called cooperation stable relations, also tend to have their own emergent properties. Band equals, sometimes denoted as ... in earlier versions of the work, is typically not including ternary logic because it is non-interaction itself or entropy. Now, onto the question. What I'm asking is how equals is both the result of stable relations of plus and equals, and is also an operator strategy in and of
Plus and
itself.
minus.
What did I say?
Of plus and equals.
Oh, plus minus. Okay, and it's also an operator strategy in and of itself. How can emergent properties of stable relations be described as an operation and sum of their parts in physics, for example, but also be described as a strategy in anthropology and history, like the European group strategy's binding institution being law? Is it the resolution of disputes? Plus and minus can be described as dispute resolution into equals, if I'm correct. TLDR, equals represents the interaction of plus and minus into stable relationships, and these stable relations often have their own emergent properties. How can emergent property of stable relations be a strategy but also denote outcomes? Is it because of an opportunity of equal to recombine using different charges sufficiently different enough for the plus heavy systems in a thermodynamic sense, and also the minus heavy systems, which collapse into a non-interaction of band equals?
Yeah. Martin, probably no point because Martin doesn't like this syntax. I think just as people want to talk about our work as philosophy or science, and it's actually meta-science, it's the same problem here, is that you have to get the frame, you have to evolve a frame to a level of abstraction. In this, you want to answer this? You want to?
Yeah, I think this to me seems somewhat to be a holdover from the general Western wrong assumption of kind of picking what is a stable relation, which is a continuous persistence through time, as an ontological entity that you can kind of separate from the conditions that give rise to it or that sustain it through time.
Yes.
And so when he's asking about strategy versus outcome, those are the same thing. They're a strategy for the two components that create the persistent pattern through time, and they're that it is an outcome of those kind of running that strategy. So it is the same in some sense, and I think there's a larger move in philosophy, perhaps, or in ways of thinking about things from this object orientation that a lot of Western philosophy tends to revolve around,
Yes.
versus Eastern, which is very much process or flow based. And so we're not saying one or the other is the better or the best or something, but what we're saying is that you can meaningfully identify entities by distinguishing their boundaries from what they're not, and that they're still emergent from other things. They're not necessarily, they're not standing on their own, if you will. They have an origin, generally speaking, and they have an input need, if you will, or a system that they themselves are emergent out of. So yeah, that's what I would say.
I think I have I'm in the, I don't know if you can they see the text? No, okay. So, I'm just saying that I answered this ahead of time, and I'm not sure it's even understandable. I'm saying the same. I'm saying more abstractly than Moritz is that you're correct that equals denotes both resolution and strategy. I think of equals as a meta move. In other words, just like we don't try to invent neologisms, we try to redefine terms. I do the same with symbols. I could invent a new symbol here, right? But I've used the symbols that exist for continuity. So you could think of the equals as a meta move. When stability emerges, that stable form itself becomes the operand in the next layer of computation, which is what you were saying, right, Moritz? That's essentially the same thing.
Yeah,
So,
and I want to add something here. If you're interested in reading something about this that is not from our work, but I think that it's nevertheless extremely relevant to this, then I recommend looking up causal emergence and especially the causal emergence 2.0 paper, which actually puts some quantitative data or mechanism, provides a quantitative mechanism to measure what layer of a causal stack contributes how much to a particular outcome. And so if you think of kind of the plus and the minus coming together and becoming the equal, or to the equal becoming something else, then, and that happening at multiple levels, then you can discover by measuring how much each of these layers contributes to a specific outcome of these kind of layers interacting with one another and mutually constraining one another's capacity to operate.
yes, that's correct.
Yes.
That's correct. I've just put the link. Right.
I think it was actually quite an interesting paper for us generally to have in mind when we talk about our work, because we talk a lot about constraints.
Yes.
And a lot of the time people will default to a singular level of constraints to analyze something. And this gives you access to this very concrete ability to talk about multiple layers of constraint acting simultaneously. And I think that that's quite valuable.
Can you see it real quick?
Plus, it's
Jesus, dumb.
plus it has Markov chains, so that's always fun.
Well, we addressed this in volume 3, which is the logic in detail, and I know what it is. I left the window open. I can hear him. It's distracting. Aya, that's enough. Aya. If it's subtle, it doesn't bother me either. But if I keep hearing it and he goes on, it's distracting. All right, so okay, so we deal with causal emergence in volume 3, which is the logic, right? And we we describe this process as in great detail. It's basically the whole structure of the logics. So, okay, are we done with this one? Have we answered it? Okay, number 3.
I need to read that again because the audience can't hear it. Curt and Martin, can you falsify advocates such as Mike Maxwell, author of Culture Thug, that argues for absolutism and dismisses rule of law as merely the imposition of the will of a sovereign? Isn't the rule of law by natural law and not by a sovereign?
I can't argue with something I mostly agree with, and I do agree with Mike on basically everything. Although I can only say that rule of law also has a history of customs and traditions behind it, and the sovereign was seen as its custodian who can only interpret it and apply his own authority within the existing constraints, not change it. But this only kept working when the population was actually capable of organizing a resistance to what would have been seen as a sovereign overstepping his authority. There's no such resistance today. I wish to see that changed, as I've stated before. Now Mike is also a radical traditionalist, saying tradition has the ultimate authority, and as per ancestral principle, it's the oldest tradition that takes precedence. This can obviously be contrary to the authority of the sovereign, and I don't remember Mike ever addressing this.
I can't. That is contradictory to everything I understand, so I don't know what to tell you. As far as I mean, I don't. I would need to get into the details of it, but every absolutist system collapsed under stagnation and revolution. The only systems that scaled into prosperity are those institutionalizing rule of law, economic advantage. I mean, basically, the history of mankind is the gradual evolution of systems of law. Whether you start out with traditional law, mythical law, the group's grand strategy, whatever. It's the what we call law today is merely writing it down and decide and requesting that all procedures within the polity be adjudicated by the same means. But I don't think I don't understand how you can even get there. We look at the failures of civilizations, which in volume 1 we go into in painful detail. They all fail for the same reasons, which we tend to think of as corruption, but that and empires fall the hardest because they have the greatest space for corruption, despite having the greatest concentration of wealth. So I don't really go for that. I don't want to read this whole fucking thing I've written here. But what absolutism does is it tends to constrain innovation. This is China's basic history.
If it wasn't because of that, China would have had capitalist revolution as early as the Song Dynasty.
Oh yeah, absolutely, no question of it. So
I think that has more to do with the long historical intuitions, Chinese culture, where they just don't argue with their superior.
Well, that in itself is a form of absolutism control.
yes, exactly. So I don't. When I get here, I don't know how to respond to this other than I can't make a case for it. The case that I have universally is that there is, you start out with Europeans have kings, all right, but that means chieftain, right? That's what that means. But but in Europe, the king is bound by the law, right? The traditional law. They're not absolutists. They can't just say anything. There's no unbound European history. Most countries, there's no unbound rights. That it's only when the authority becomes so powerful that it can disregard the necessary rights of individuals, or basically there's such an asymmetry of power that they can abuse the population, that authoritarianism is actually practiced, and it always ends in the same
I mean, just look at the first emperor, right? The first Qin Shi Huang, the Qin dynasty lasted, what, less than 100 years or something? Just 2 emperors. because they united the country for the first time from these warring states, and the emperor's words are effectively as law, and a whole bunch of crazy laws came into being.
Yeah, I think that I said here, law is command. That's false.
Mhm.
Law in the West, law is contract, and we may put people in charge of adjudicating the terms of contracts on our behalf, but we are very, and historically have been very well able to limit the rulers. One of the great things about kings is you can kill them, which happens with regularity when they get out of hand. It's when you get into, you can only have real authority when you have a military, extraordinary military with extraordinary powers over the population, and bureaucracy forming an intelligence service that constrains them. People don't put up with it, because why is authority necessary? Authority is only necessary if you want to make people do things they don't want, that's not in their interest. If you say that go ahead, Martin. I'm trying to get through this.
I think you often need to use authority to make people do even things that are in their interest. The thing of raising a child.
A child isn't able to make choices.
Many people aren't either.
What?
Many adults aren't either.
Yeah, but
wait, Martin, are you trying to use modernity, which is essentially very odd within human history, to prove the case that for most of human history this is the case?
I can't figure out what he's trying to say. I know what you're trying to say. You're trying to say that we should have somebody in charge who can make decisions, and that those people will do what's good for the people and themselves. That's what you're saying.
I don't want that authority to be centralized, as I stated before. But I see the need for authority, and I'd rather it be distributed.
Distributed authority.
Subsidiary authority.
Well, I mean, we always agree on that. All right, so I don't know where to go with this. So what's the next one?
Martin, Martin, do you want to read out your rebuttal?
Yeah, I wrote some responses. The first is that every system has collapsed, and this one we have now is clearly collapsing. So that alone doesn't tell us that much.
That's not true. Matter of fact, we are incredibly good at reforming. The English system, which is rule of law, is the best at reforming. England is the longest serving government in history, in our European history. We've had 4 revolutions in America in just the past 200 years, and they're all because the system allows reform. So
England also right now is in the worst totalitarian hellhole in Europe.
Sorry?
Britain is currently the worst totalitarian hellhole in the West.
It's going through a reformation. It's going to do it. It's doing it right now. This is how it's done. You can either you can try to do. Bush tried to do it, and we voted him out of office, and now we're stuck with Trump trying to do it, right? Well, what's happening in Europe? They're currently the Tories wouldn't do the job, so they got voted out of office, and these guys are worse. And what's happening is they're ending up very close to civil war. So what they'll do in response to not having civil war is reform, and that's how things work in Europe. You know, the great thing about the European distributed system is that if the Habsburgs fail, the British take over, right? If the British fail, the Americans take over. When most of Europe failed, The Germans came very close to taking over, and it looks like the Germans were right in retrospect. So you can't. The whole trick is can you have a rotating system? In China, they have a rotating system. I don't know how we describe it there, but you have dynasties, right? Is that how you think of it?
Mm-hmm.
China, and so a dynasty gets in control as long as it can, and then it fails.
As long as it has mandate of heaven. And the
Right.
system become atrophied, and usually there's some kind of civil war and upheaval. The system reset again.
In India, it's basically impossible to govern, right? I mean, by standardized means. So they were a very a not so close approximation of the Holy Roman Empire, right? There's the Germanic peoples are spread into a zillion little princedoms, right? They have a common culture. They have a common culture and a common religion, but they are the central power is really limited to like the church was, to removing legitimacy from someone who's a problem, or acting as a judiciary to resolve a conflict. They're not that powerful. Same with India. China has more authority to do things, but
The problem with China is it's, in a sense, it becomes, even if it wasn't so at the founding of a dynasty, if you look at Chinese history, it inevitably becomes absolutist.
that's correct.
So, for example, let's say a warlord, like take the Ming Dynasty, for example. Ming Dynasty, the first emperor, the guy who chased out the Mongols and actually established the Ming Dynasty, he was a monk. So
Yes.
he and his buddies formed together, got the peasants to rebel, and then took over the whole country.
Yep.
And then throughout his term, if you want to say, because his term essentially lasts until he dies, he systematically eliminated all these other guys who helped him to get into power. So he went from a multipolar, maybe the wrong word, from less absolutist to absolutist. And then Ming Dynasty, the follow-up emperors became some of the most corrupt in Chinese history. One of these emperors, the Ming emperors, I think he was like, they basically, in history, they say that he was born with a bad stock. Like his mother is some poor peasant from southern part of China or something. So like he had an ingrained notion that he needs to amass wealth. He amassed so much silver, so much wealth into the national treasury that when they accounted for it, some of these older silver bars has already corroded. So that's just to give you an example of the type of corruption that's going on. And versus, let's say you compare it against the Qing emperors, the last dynasty. The Qing are not really Chinese. They're the Manchurians, right? I.e., foreign barbarian people. But they had more of a rotating system of governance. I.e., the emperor was not so much. How should I put it? The Qing emperor wasn't strictly hereditary. They actually had a council of lords that voted in who should be the next emperor. I mean, there's some hereditary sense, but among, let's say, the 10 sons of the emperor, who should be the next emperor? It's not strictly the emperor that named his successor, but he actually need to have his council of lords to prove that. So as a result, the Qing emperors were less corrupt compared to the Ming emperors.
Yes. So I'm trying to get it into Martin's head enough that I can find a way. Subsidiarity helped. I can find a way for him to express what he wants by means that are survivable. In other words, not only possible but survivable, and that a public would find at least reasonably desirable. I mean, we've known for a long time that if you can find a benevolent dictator, a competent benevolent dictator, it's really nice, but you don't get them very often.
I think one thing perhaps to realize that the incentives always shape the behavior, right? And if the incentives that a ruler is subject to don't provide him with what he needs to actually account for the well-being of his population or act in their interests, then he won't, most likely.
Yeah.
So
people follow incentives.
Well, that is the point I was going to make, that it was perhaps even more common that strong monarch protected the normal population from abuses of the oligarchy.
Right. Yeah, I think there's also a question of scale, though. Like modernity and pre-modernity are fundamentally different in terms of both scale of populations, as well as the means by which communication and transportation, all these things happen. I think that fundamentally changes the dynamics, that we can't actually retroactively kind of go back through societies or civilizations and then apply the same sticks to them, other than like general comparisons. Like how do you have an absolute ruler in a world of instant communication, unless you're doing something like China, which I don't know, might also not have its own emperor stay in power for much longer. We don't know. So I think just there's the structure, and then there's also the technological reality that fundamentally shifts how things operate.
What the Chinese elders are trying to do right now is to revert the absolutist rule by Xi back to the ruling council-based consensus that Deng established.
Yes.
Whether they succeed or not, I think depends on whose side the military is on. And from what I've seen, the military is on the side of the elders, or at least the after this round of purge, because the absolutist rule by Mao for the first quarter decade after the so-called liberation was still fresh on the elders' minds, and they certainly don't like the way that Xi has taken the country. All right, so shall we move on?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I have something to say about this next one. Question 4. Why do you think the government can win the Bitcoin war just by banning it? They won't be able to ban it entirely. So that may be correct. All they have to do is shut off the on-ramps, and the network will die of itself.
Excellent.
That's my piece.
If you can't get money in or out of it, eventually,
then it becomes a let's say a network for illicit activities and money laundering, but even it doesn't even do that very well. The best network for illicit money laundering is actually either gold or the US dollar, which is essentially untraceable.
Right, exactly. So I don't think I've written about this extensively. I like Martin's response, like, you're making a claim here. Why wouldn't they be able to? Which is brilliant. The way they attack this, they always assume that they wouldn't be able to. Why would you think it? Well, you either you take the on-ramp, off-ramp out, then you lose the institutional investors. If you lose the institutional investors, you lose the reason this thing is gaining in price, and you restore the volatility. So if I was the state, I would simply say in the next 30, anybody who buys Fed coin for the next 30 days can have all the benefits of Bitcoin. But after that, we're going to outlaw any and all digital currencies for any purpose whatsoever. And the banks, they'll stop it. the banks will stop it. There's no way to get money in and out of it, so it'll become basically a criminal. It'll become basically a criminal enterprise by de facto, because that's the only people who use it. And once the criminal enterprise, it's a criminal enterprise, then it's just a matter of time. So go ahead. I don't think the government's going to do that, by the way. I think it's turned out to be a useful tool. But go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's the way that they would do it. I think at this point, there's also an open question about the networks that Bitcoin has created of relationships and the incentives for politicians and people who make laws. And there's actually quite the powerful kind of a interest group that organizes to put people who are pro-Bitcoin into office and to keep people who are anti-Bitcoin, who are in office, away from enacting those laws. So I don't know that will be enough, but I'm saying
this is a treasury issue, and if it becomes a treasury issue, it won't make any difference with those politicians.
Right.
So I agree that I've been a critic of the Bitcoin since 2012. I remember when I started writing about it. It was 12 or 14. And my criticism has only been that it's not money. It's a monetary substitute. It's closest to token money, but it's fungible like shares. So it's actually shared. It's actually a Bitcoin is a fractional share of the Bitcoin network that you're treating as token money. In other words, token money can only be bought or sold on the network, right? And that as such, it has those properties, those limits of token money and fractional shares. And so I said, don't call it money, and don't claim that the government can't shut it down. And those are my two concerns, because otherwise you're creating a false promise. I think that what's happened that I've noticed over the past 5 years, I think it's more than maybe 6 years, is that the quality of people talking about Bitcoin has gone up from the early people, and that there are people who have understanding monetary systems and that kind of thing, whereas originally the people were just nutcakes, they fruitcakes. So I think that my view is that if it can function as a relatively stable means, in other words, if it gets enough in it, a stable means of asset protection, I think that's great. And the reason is that if you look at it today, if you are trying to play an asset preservation game, you basically say, I'll put it in oil when oil is going to go up. I'll pull it and put it over here. You have to keep dancing your investments around to preserve them if you're trying to make money on them. And I don't like it. I think there should be a stable store of money. Gold there isn't enough of, and it's prone to manipulation. So I actually like this as a store of value. But I only like it as a store of value if the state decides that it wants to invest too, so that it would have a means of certain stabilization and non-manipulation.
Well, I would argue that there's not enough Bitcoin to go around, and it's too expensive in terms of transaction.
Yeah, but you don't buy a whole Bitcoin, right? Correct. All right,
sure.
I'm going to say
you buy a few sats and so on, but then again, when you try to transact, because the whole point of store of value, at some point you want to realize that and go get something else. The transaction cost is just too high.
Right. The transaction cost is high. The transaction cost is too slow, and the too high, too slow, and what am I missing? There's the third one. It's too high, too slow, and it's not recoverable. Well, it's not warrantable, right? So it's not recoverable, and therefore it's not insurable. So on the flip side, excuse me, I remember what the last one is. And the last thing is that the architecture of it with this really long whatever, it has no means of posting to this ledger, basically taking stuff off the account. There's no way to get rid of it. And so this thing just grows eternally. So we need a way of basically taking information that's no longer valuable off.
Why? Because it's really just a ledger of transaction records. Why would you want to take records out?
Because just purely technologically, it's going to eventually get too big.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Yeah, what's the point of keeping all that history?
Yeah,
in every full node. I mean,
we have the history, but
yeah, I think that there are technical solutions to this. It's quite simple, actually. You just essentially hash a particular state in time, and then those
are a zero transaction.
Well, you just download like a essentially a signed, hashed form of the database.
It's just roll, or you could just roll. There's the mechanism for rolling coins together, right? So if I have $1 million in coins, right, and they're off and I've got them over in the 6 decimal places, right, of value, right? I mean, to the right of the decimal point, I should be able to combine all those, right, into something new. There's a bunch of tactics I should be able to employ to get that, so that the search criteria for the database isn't fucking infinite. All right.
I think we beat that one to death. Question 5. How do you see the small percentage of Anglo DNA affecting blacks in America other than the gain of a few IQ points?
Potential to generate a Thomas Sowell on a rare occasion.
Yes, very much so. Well, I mean, most American blacks are at least 20% white. The vast majority. It's all over the spectrum. It goes from mostly to very small, but
was that mostly white females or white males?
I don't know the answer.
I would guess mostly white males.
Yeah. So excuse me, I got thrown off by my brain trying to calculate that, so I'm going to try to get off it. But about 20% on average. You can take any two populations that have disparate IQ medians, and when you reproduce, you basically get the average. That's it, right? So you will get an average, but with this, what does that mean? That means if you have 120 IQ, 115 IQ white guy and I don't know what the right order is to do this, and 100 and a 95 IQ black woman, you're going to get something that's more favoring the.
You can also see that you shouldn't do that.
Sorry?
You can also see that you shouldn't do that.
You could, yeah. I mean, I'm exactly agree. You shouldn't do that. It's not. It's really clear that miscegenation is a really bad idea, but
that's the next question.
What?
That's the next question.
Yes, that's a natural segue into question 6. Please deliberate. Do you think we can try to criminalize I have a hard time pronouncing miscegenation under natural law? I know the dissident right is concerned above all, with good reason, about demographic displacement, but it seems to me that the greatest threat to European genome is miscegenation. Miscegenation.
Just race mixing.
No, race mixing. All right, not immigration. The Jews were a small minority without a state for 2,000 years and maintained the people because of strict endogamous norms. From what I can gather, race mixing constitutes at least 4 property violations. 1. Existential destruction by lineal suicide and ancestry erasure. 2. Parasitism of the genetic commons. Pollution of a gene pool, a shared resource we all rely on. And 3. The theft of inheritable property. Descendants' rightful genetic, cultural, and historical inheritance. And 4. Irreciprocal imposition on existential and psychological interests. Miscegenation deprives offspring of coherence of identity across biological, psychological, and cultural domains, producing alienation from both ancestral groups and reducing a child's mating prospects.
Well, I still use natural law to refer to laws of human behavior, not their institutional application, but I seem to be the last one to use it that way.
No, that's not true.
Anyway, in that sense, it doesn't tell us what our institutions should be accomplishing, but when we decide that, it tells us how, in the same way, laws of physics inform us when working on some engineering project. So if your goal is preservation and the success of your population, as mine is, then miscegenation is as in line with natural law as it gets, because banning it will help that preservation. The question is whether the current population is too propagandized to accept it, in which case we'd have to propagandize them back into beliefs that are actually good for them first.
Okay, so who wrote this? There's no name here. This is a brilliantly written question.
Anonymous.
Are you sure it's not from somebody on staff?
Not me.
Wow. Whoever wrote this, thank you. It's brilliant. I don't have anything to add. The question answers itself, which is that, and Martin's right, as usual. The natural law is just what it is, right? It's just measurements of variation from reciprocity, right? So
it's everything.
What?
It's everything else too.
Yes, I just meant in this case. I'm sorry. So that's all I'm saying. All right. So that's all we're saying. And Martin's right that there's a difference between natural law and its implementation and legislative law. And I think the way that this gets it's both confusing and useful in our organization is that I'm very interested in continuing the development of natural law for peoples for whom they're people who are capable of it, right? And I want to use that continuation as a means of suppressing the means of deception. So Martin I want to see if I can produce the same effect Martin does, but I want to be able to see if I can produce it technically. Whereas Martin has, I would say you have less faith in that, and you would rather have a more human solution to it. I'm suspecting that's the case.
I think I'm trying to address a calculation problem, but unlike economists, I'm not obsessing about price, but there are like 100 other things that need to be calculated that aren't at scale.
Okay, so we're both suspicious of each other's the success of each other's preferred method. So shit, I lost my train of thought. So in this case, the argument is made by whoever submitted the question. It's actually correct. Those things, those violations are true. The question is whether what is the scope of suppressions of those irreciprocities that you and your polity want to and feel they should enforce? And my argument would be the more of them, the better. And in this case, that would be a prohibition of miscegenation. I'm not sure I would prefer like that, but on a judgmental basis, in other words, a judicial basis, it's easily decidable that it's bad.
It was banned in America before basically Jews overturned it.
Yep. All right.
I think last thing I'll add is that whenever we say it's not good, it's just, I mean, we make a judgment that according to our preferred sense and the consequences that we know are going to happen from that behavior will turn out against our valuation to be bad. And I think, but every society has the right, if you will, that they can't enforce necessarily, but has the right to make its own mistakes and to discover its own constraints by running into them head first.
Our argument would be you just can't lie about it.
Well,
you can't take a good thing.
You existentially can. The question is just what consequences are we who have power to prevent them from doing so to do that. Or I think there's always the unstated part of our judgments, which is if there is no force to hold to account the those under judgment, then only nature will do that rather than human agency, if you will. So does that make sense? Like we as Europeans.
No, I'm worried that you're missing the Institute's position. Our position is do whatever the hell you want, but don't lie about it.
Or what?
What?
Or what?
You will pay the cost of lying about it.
Exactly, and that's all that I'm pointing out.
Yeah.
And if we would prefer that they don't lie, and if we would prefer they don't lie before they run to the inevitable consequences of actually lying, then we would have to apply some force or move other people to apply some force to force them not to lie so that they don't run into those consequences. But that's all I'm saying, that whenever we say don't lie, it's bad. We're making an assertion that is warranted, that judging it is then leaving us with a choice of using our resources to stop that before that happens, essentially.
Well, you don't stop it. You don't stop it. Go ahead, Martin. Martin, go ahead.
Also depends on how we view it. If we read it as those people lying to themselves or some parasite lying to them, and we as a responsible party have a duty to remove him.
Right, and this is, I guess the reason why I'm going into this point is that this is the exact justification that's used by liberals today to justify intervention in other societies and to move them into democracy. They're not democratic, they're not respecting women's rights, they're not doing the things that we value culturally and that we operate by, and then we will use our martial force and our state essentially to destroy these societies and attempt to move them into a state they can't possibly reach with the means at their disposal in that way. So this is, I think, important for our side to recognize that when we say don't do that or don't lie, we can't actually prevent them unless we choose to actually use our resources to do so.
We cannot prevent them from lying, but we have to use force to prevent them to offset the cost onto others.
Correct.
Sure. Absolutely.
If they lie to themselves and suffer the consequences, fine. It's how nature works. This is evolution, right? You reap what you sow. But if you try to offset the cost onto some others, like these liberals do, then that's when I have a problem. Especially if those others are not aware of the lie and the harm that it's causing.
This is what I mean about calling a strong man who's leading a society that has no capacity to actually operate democratically, an autocrat or a tyrant, and using the justification of we will free these people as the reason to intervene because he is not operating reciprocally with them. So I guess I'm just saying that oftentimes this exact reasoning in the lower IQ version is used to justify interventions that have catastrophic effects. And I would like us to be explicit about the costs and who pays them and what the boundaries of them are in some sense. Anyway, continue.
I'm trying to make sure that nothing's going sideways there. I know what you're trying to do, but I think that the only thing that really is relevant is what Francis said. If you externalize the cost of your lying onto others, especially like let's make near to Martin's heart, if you make promises about multiculturalism, right? That's simply false. There's no advantage to it. There's advantage to having quarters in your urban trading cities, right? That makes sense, but there's no value to multiculturalism. In fact, it's actually a detriment in every single case. So, if you say that, now what happens if you broadcasting this bullshit and my population starts believing it? What do we do now? You're imposing a cost on me, right? And so it's not do whatever you want as long as it doesn't provoke retaliation from others. So my argument would be, yeah, just don't say it's good. We choose it; it's a preference, but don't say it's good. You'll end up you'll migrate. If you do that, you're going to end up migrating to the average of the IQ distributions, the median of IQ distributions, because all genetics eventually progresses toward the median, right? I mean,
Regression to the mean.
Excuse me, thank you. Regresses to the mean. So you're basically purging all the advantages.
Yeah, and IQ is not a be all end all. There's all sorts of other problems.
Neoteny, conscientiousness, and
but being diverse is itself a position.
Help me, I don't understand.
That a homogeneous population. Huh?
Hold on.
I'm sorry if what happened. It's a butt dial. I apologize. Thanks, boss.
Curt, pay attention.
Apparently, butt dial 911. I don't know how the hell I did that.
Okay.
A homogeneous population has same intuitions and much more easily develop trust and organize all that stuff. Whereas,
I don't. Maybe I'm lost.
Yeah, it's what the guy is saying. A common diversity is inherently divisive.
Inherently
divisive.
Oh, of course.
Divisive.
Even if you end up with very similar traits across those populations, it's still divisive because they're just different populations.
There's a bunch of reasons why people prefer diversity. First of all, there's political motivation for it. Secondly, there's a status motivation, and third, there's an economic motivation for it, but it's always damaging in the long term.
Yeah, it's usually that they don't want people organizing against their political goals. And diverse people cannot organize.
Mm-hmm. That's what I mean. There's political as well. All right. Have we killed this one? And then go on to the next one?
Yep. Question 7. This may be the last question. Is there any importance to YDNA other than just tracking the father lineage?
It has effects on phenotype too, so it's not less important than the rest of the DNA. And it's a factor in why men and women are different.
Yeah. Actually, there's a pretty big difference between the X and Y chromosomes. we tend to focus on the fact, at least I do, I focused on the fact that the Y is smaller because that means there's less material to function as repair. That's a small thing. In general, we were brought up. I was making a joke about having the frequency of sex having an impact on the sex of the child. If you have sex more frequently, you're more likely to have a male child. If you have it less frequently, you're more likely to have a female child. This is partly due to just as in many things, males carry velocity and females who carry mass. If you think about it, like fish or humans, it doesn't make any difference. Males sperm swim faster than females, but they live shorter time periods. So, if you want to have a boy, you try to get whatever the maximum date for fertilization is, and I'm not going to get into details, but anyway, that should increase the chances somewhat, other than the acidity or baseness of the woman's uterus. In any event, vagina, not uterus. Basically, the X is a generalist and the Y is a specialist. That's the simple way of saying that, is that that males are where nature experiments. That's why there's a wider distribution. And where X is where it selects for cooperative fitness and somatic integrity. I'm going to simplify that too. Think of it as males experiment. We experiment with males, and the stuff that's good gets captured by females and replicated. Does that make sense? And so, so there is a big difference between them. You have a competition strategy in the male versus a survival and maintenance strategy in the female, and this is very consistent. It's fascinating, actually. That's all there is. That's all there is to say. The differences between the genes are not just sexual selection. It's that but with sexual selection come very different outcomes, very different purposes. We're not equal in that respect. You see it easily. Women live longer, partly because they have more genetic repair, and partly because they're more risk averse to deleterious. They're more risk averse for cellular damage. Men are the opposite. We're more willing to take cellular damage, and so we have less repair facilities, so we don't live as long. All right.
So maybe I should have flipped the other way around. Let those with more cellular repairability to take more risks.
That's the problem. It's sort of like the brain thing that I try to explain to people. I don't know why it's so hard to get across, is that women make a lot of connections and keep a lot of nonsense running in parallel. It's very near term, low prediction, right? Low speed, low prediction. How does the male brain actually do all that intertemporal prediction so fast? Well, it sacrifices what the female does. So you male brains, I mean, at the left side is like, stuff goes along the left side like a freaking, it's like, it's just really fast, right? Women are bihemispheric, right? And so it makes sense. It makes, you can't, with the same material, or the same organism supplying the same material, you have to make trade-offs. And so the trade-off is that men solve problems over time, but they operate quickly in time. Women save problems in time by operating slowly in time with many things. So it's few things versus many things. It's just an equilibrium trade-off. It's like why I say that the ternary logic matters is because no matter what you do, you're bounded by the triangle. You have only so much energy that has to be captured and put to use by so many means. And the humans, people don't think about this, but we have developed cooking, which makes us have more calories with less effort, right? And so we can have bodies that could run for under persistence running instead of be like the shape of gorillas who have to digest all this stuff all the time, right? Well, that was a heck of a trade-off to be able to make. Same trade-off but you couldn't, without that ability, you wouldn't have the trade-off we can make for the size of our brains, because brains are fucking expensive. Even yours, Maurice. I mean, think about that. Sorry, I love you, brother. I had to get so.
That's why we're getting rid of them now, because we're not using them.
Is that why? You know what it is? Actually, it's a smart question. Smart assertion is that a wolf, for example, has to maintain high. All right, Maurice. Thank you for participating. We'll see you later. Is that you have to maintain vigilance as a wolf, and so they're more persistent and they're more vigilant, and so they have more. They have to process more calories of computation faster with the same organism, whereas a dog is more like a child, doesn't feel the same level of excitement, agitation in time. And so what we're getting is a bigger brain is necessary to produce the energy necessary to do things quickly and intensely in time. Whereas if we do things over time, your brain doesn't have to produce as much output, much energetic output. So, and bigger brains do matter. Like men are 10% larger than women, and independent of the fact that we're bigger, right? I mean, it's just in general 10%, and we have more gray matter, which is computational power, but we have less associative white matter, so we have less. Women have more associative power. Yeah, I can't imagine being a woman. I kind of, for like half a second, it might be when I have a nervous breakdown. It's not easy to have a woman's brain, in my opinion, and you expect too much of them on occasion. Anyway, so if I answered that one, we answered that one effectively.
Yeah, expecting too much out of women, that's my persistent shortcoming.
Right, you just can't expect that much out of it. It makes sense.
Well, that's a civilizational shortcoming right now.
Yes, well, I mean, honestly, that's what is the, I mean, I love that over the past year, I can't pull their names off the top of my head right now. We've seen women in academia start to come out and say, shit, the female intuition, instinct, and behavior is really damaging to civilization if it's let loose. And it's great for the family and the social order, right? But it's terrible in the political and economic order because they basically destroy all competitive research, right? All research and development. And they reduce it to trivialities. And so you've seen these women come out with it. And I don't like it either, but I mean, one of the findings of our work is that the reason we're in this problem right now, and the reason it's not just us, it happens every time, is that once women have too much influence in economy and polity, you're basically dead. It's just a matter of time. It's because their instincts are actually for stability, not competitive advantage. Again, what does an X chromosome do versus a Y chromosome? It produces for stability. It does not produce for competitive advantage. What does a Y chromosome? It produces competitive advantage at high cost to the organism. So,
I frame it as it's adapted to operate within constraints, not to find where those constraints should be.
That's correct.
There's no limit on female consumption internally because somebody would have, through normal history, provided them those limits.
Yes. All right.
Do we have time for one more?
I wrote quite a long answer.
Yeah, I see that.
The second half is tangential, so if I left it out, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think we should go to Jesus. The next bunch of them are like,
They're pretty dense.
they're pretty dense. All right, so let's cap it.
Okay.
Do I do this? Do I do
Yeah,
this?
you do the outro.
Okay, so outro is thank you for playing with us today. Hope you got something out of it. It's always fun for us. I don't know where we are in breaking these up into.
Well, so we had a volunteer who was doing this, and then since then he has kind of disappeared. So I guess either I have to bite the bullet and do this, or we're just
Two time sense. We need volunteers, right?
We either need the AI to do it, or we need volunteers to do this.
That's true. So what is the? Oh yeah, I guess the AIs ought to be able to do this shortly. Now, if they can't do it,
It should be. I mean, it's not difficult, especially since I have all the timestamps and all.
Yeah. So so basically, what do I got to do here? So we have done what 300 to 500 of these things. I don't know how many basic questions we've answered. You know?
Yeah, we've got we've answered 300 questions about now.
Okay. And they're getting pretty difficult, actually, which is kind of funny. And they've gotten more challenging over time. So please, Francis puts the link to submitting your question in the comments. Is it comments or the instructions or whatever?
The YouTube video description.
The description. So please click on the link and submit your questions there. We eventually get to them. And we really appreciate you asking us. We do these, we're supposed to do these every other week, right? Is that how it's supposed to happen?
Once every 2 weeks.
That's a bit of a running joke that we do them every other week.
Right. But, well, we're pretty good for a long time. But, trying to launch a business is not exactly an easy thing, and it's taken time. So, so we do these every 2 weeks. We try to do them every 2 weeks. And I think we're back on, I feel like the crisis of trying to get the business going is over, or at least my time went. So please do that. And anyway, it's thank you for participating. It's Martin, Francis, and Curt for the Natural Law Institute. Hope you have a great day.
Bye, everybody.